You know the stories, right? The beautiful princess, the charming prince, the magical kiss, and of course that perfect ending, happily ever after. It's the comforting formula we all grew up on. But what if I told you that the fairy castle you remember is actually built on a foundation of blood, torture, and pure terror?
Yeah, let's get into this, because the versions of these tales that you and I know, especially the ones from Disney, are seriously sanitized. They're like the squeaky clean cover versions of some really dark, really brutal original songs. So today, we're going to peel back all that sugarcoating and see the grim reality that's been hiding underneath. And this says it all, doesn't it? On one side, you've got this beautiful, hopeful, magical idea from Disney, and on the other, you have the raw, painful desperation from the original story. So let's see just how deep this rabbit hole of horrors really goes.
Okay, let's start with maybe the most famous princess of all. Her story is pretty much the definition of happily ever after, but its roots, oh, they are tangled in some seriously gruesome stuff.
It's simple, it's clean, it's so satisfying, right? The little glass slipper is this perfect, magical fit. The wicked stepsisters, they just get left in the dust, totally defeated. It's the perfect ending for a family movie night. But yeah, that is not the whole story, not even close.
Just think about that for a second. The sheer brutality of that advice is, wow. In the Brothers Grimm version, that slipper isn't just about finding the right foot size, it's a test of how desperate you are. The mother actually tells her daughters, hey, once you're queen, you'll never have to walk again anyway, so what's a few toes between you and a kingdom?
And somehow, it gets even worse. The first sister, she actually does it. She cuts off her toes, jams her foot in the shoe, and the prince rides off with her. But Cinderella's little bird friends call him out, pointing to all the blood pouring out of the slipper. So he brings her back. Then the second sister tries, but she hacks off a piece of her heel to make it fit. Again, the doves expose the bloody lie. This story isn't about a lost shoe, it's about violent deception and even more violent revenge. Because at the end, at Cinderella's wedding, those same doves swoop down and peck out both of the stepsisters' eyes, leaving them blind for the rest of their lives.
So if you thought a wedding meant the horror was over, think again. For Snow White's evil queen, the wedding celebration was just the beginning of a truly awful punishment.
We all remember this from the Disney movie, right? The queen gets chased up a cliff by the dwarfs, there's a big storm, lightning strikes, and she just falls to her doom. It's a dramatic end, for sure, but it's almost impersonal. It's like an act of nature, not an act of justice.
The original Grimm tale, however, whoa. The punishment is anything but quick or impersonal. The evil queen is actually invited to Snow White's wedding, and when she gets there, they force her into a pair of iron shoes that have been sitting in a fire until they're glowing red hot. Then they make her dance in these searing hot slippers until she literally drops dead in front of everyone.
And that's the absolute key here. This wasn't fate. It wasn't a convenient thunderstorm. This was a sentence. It was a public execution designed to be as painful and as humiliating as possible. It really drives home one of the main themes of these old stories. Justice isn't just served, it is inflicted.
All right, for our last story, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're moving away from the violent revenge of the Grimm brothers to the deep, profound tragedy of Hans Christian Andersen. And this one isn't some old folk tale. It has a very different origin and a heartbreakingly different feel.
See, this is super important to understand. Hans Christian Andersen wasn't just writing down stories he heard around the village. He was an author, crafting these tales himself. And that means The Little Mermaid was never meant to be a simple cautionary tale. It was a deeply personal, tragic story about unrequited love and the ultimate sacrifice. In Andersen's version, Ariel doesn't just trade away her voice. The sea witch literally cuts her tongue out. Her new legs come with a terrible price, constant agonizing pain. Every single step she takes feels like she's walking on sharp daggers. And after all that suffering, the prince she loves marries somebody else. She's given one last horrible choice: kill the prince, let his blood touch her feet, and she can turn back into a mermaid. Instead, she chooses to die, throwing herself into the ocean where she dissolves into sea foam. No wedding, no happily ever after, just pain and sacrifice.
So, after hearing all of that, you've got to be asking the obvious question: why? Why the mutilation, the torture, the blinding, the crushing sadness? What was the point of telling stories that were this terrifying?
Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. They were never meant for kids. These were folk tales for adults, told out loud while people were working or shared as entertainment for the community around a fire at night. They were cautionary tales, meant to teach real lessons about real dangers, about survival, and about morality. The crazy violence wasn't just for shock value. It was a powerful way to hammer home the message that evil deeds have severe, and I mean severe, consequences.
And you can actually watch this change happen over time. It's fascinating. You start with these gritty, real-world warnings being told by peasants. Then they get cleaned up a bit and retold in the fancy courts of the French aristocracy. From there, they make their way into the homes of middle-class families who wanted moral lessons for their kids. And finally, boom, they're transformed by Disney into the global blockbusters we know today. With each step on that journey, a little more of the original darkness got washed away.
Okay, so this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. How did these stories change so much? It's really easy to just point the finger at Disney, but the truth is, the process of cleaning up fairy tales started long before a mouse ever entered the picture.
The truth is, Disney was just the latest stop on a very long train. Every single person who told these stories, every storyteller, every collector, every writer, they all changed them a little bit to fit who they were talking to and what their own culture valued. The story is never set in stone. It's a living thing that's always evolving.
Get this, even the Brothers Grimm, the guys we think of as the source of all these original dark tales, they were editors too. Their first book was a serious, scholarly attempt to just preserve old German folklore. But when it became a surprise hit with families, they started cleaning it up. They took out the sexual stuff, like Rapunzel getting pregnant in the tower, but they kept most of the violence. And they added more obvious Christian morals to make the stories more appealing to their new middle-class readers.
And this quote from a historian on Reddit just nails it perfectly. Disney isn't some villain who ruined fairy tales. They're just the most recent and most successful storytellers in a centuries-long tradition of adaptation. They did exactly what Charles Perrault did and what the Grimms themselves did. They reshaped the story for their time and their audience. So, that leaves us with one last big question. What do we want from these stories now? Do we need the comfort of a guaranteed happily ever after, a world where our dreams always come true? Or is there still some value in the original point of these tales, to act as warnings that the world can be a dark and dangerous place, where your actions have very real, sometimes brutal consequences? The choice, it seems, is always up to the storyteller.